The night he showed up at the hotel, I was carrying a tray of champagne flutes to the penthouse elevator and trying not to think about how my feet had been hurting since 4 o'clock. That was my job. Not thinking, or rather, thinking about exactly one thing at a time. The next guest, the next request, the next shift. The Meridian had a way of doing that to you. 42 floors of marble and quiet lighting, and the specific kind of wealthy that doesn't need to announce itself. You learned quickly that the people who stayed here didn't want to be noticed, and so neither did you. I'd been working the evening concierge desk and VIP floor service for almost a year by then. I liked it. I liked the order of it, the predictability. Every shift had a shape to it, and even on the hard nights, when someone's reservation got lost or a guest wanted something the kitchen couldn't produce at 11 p.m. There was a script. You follow the script, you get through the night, you go home. I was good at scripts. What I wasn't good at anymore was the thing waiting for me outside of them. His name was Scott, and I'd broken up with him 7 months earlier, after 2.5 years that had slowly, quietly, steadily rearranged the way I thought about everything. Not in the big dramatic way people expect when you say you left someone. There was no single moment. It was more like the water rising. So gradual you convince yourself it's not rising at all, until one day you realize you're standing with it at your chin, and you don't remember how you got there. I'd moved out, changed my number, started over, and for 4 months it worked. He'd left me alone. I'd started sleeping properly again, eating regular meals, returning to being someone I recognized. Then the calls started coming to the hotel's main line. I want to be careful here about what I say, because the first time I told someone about it, they looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was the problem. Like I was making it more than it was. So I'll just say, he called 6 times over 3 weeks, always asking for me by name, always hanging up before the call could be transferred to a manager. I reported it to my supervisor, who was kind about it, who wrote it down, who said she'd note it in my file. But notes in a file don't do much when someone walks through a lobby. It was a Tuesday, the last week of February. Cold the way February in Vancouver gets cold. Wet and gray, and the kind of chill that finds the gap between your coat and your scarf no matter what you do. The evening rush had thinned out. I was standing behind the concierge desk, updating a restaurant reservation for a guest in 3208, when I felt more than saw the shift in the lobby behind me. There's a particular stillness that comes over a hotel when something is wrong. The staff feel it before they know what it is. I turned without thinking. He was standing just past the revolving door. He looked the same. That was what hit me first, stupidly. That he just looked exactly the same. Dark coat, the one I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. Hair a little too long. And that expression, the one I hadn't been able to name while I was with him, but had since found the word for. Expectant. Like the world owed him something and had simply forgotten to deliver. Our eyes met. I didn't move. Couldn't for a second. My hands were flat on the desk, and I was thinking, absurdly, about the reservation I hadn't finished updating. Then he started walking toward me. I said his name quietly, before he could say mine. A reflex. Something in me still defaulting to keeping the peace. I just want to talk, he said. He was close enough now that I could see he hadn't slept well. The skin under his eyes had that gray, papery look. You won't return my calls. Those calls were to my workplace, I said. I kept my voice even. That was the script. Stay calm, don't escalate. You know I can't talk to you here. Then come outside. 5 minutes. No. Something moved through his face. You're being dramatic. And there it was. The word that had done more work than any other word in our 2.5 years. The word that made me question whether the water was actually rising. I'm at work, I said. You need to leave. He reached across the desk and put his hand on my arm. It wasn't violent, that was the thing about him. It was never technically violent, never anything you could point to and say that. Right there, that was it. It was just his hand on my arm, grip firm enough to mean something. In the middle of a hotel lobby with soft music playing. And 2 other guests drifting toward the elevator bank 20 feet away. It was the kind of contact that's designed to look like nothing. I felt it in my chest like a dropped stone. Come outside, he said again. His voice had dropped. I'm not asking, sir. The word came from behind me and slightly to my left, low, unhurried, not aggressive, just certain, in the way that certain voices can stop a room without raising themselves. I turned. There was a man standing near the alcove beside the concierge desk. I'd seen him check in 2 weeks earlier. Suite 4001. Corporate booking. A name I wasn't supposed to say outside of internal communications, but that half the staff already knew. He came and went quietly. He always said please and thank you. He tipped without theatrics. The general manager had mentioned once, in passing, that he was the kind of guest the hotel liked to keep. He was looking at Scott. He wasn't a large man, particularly. Medium height, dark hair, a few threads of gray at the temples. He was wearing a jacket the color of charcoal. I know. But that's what he was wearing. And he had his hands in his pockets, and he was entirely still. I don't believe she wants to continue this conversation, he said. His accent was faint, something Eastern European softened by years somewhere else. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Scott with the particular expression of someone who has already done the math. Scott blinked. He didn't move his hand. This is a private conversation, he said. Not particularly, the man said. He glanced at Scott's hand on my arm. Just glanced. And this is a lobby. Something shifted. I felt it before I understood it. The way the air around Scott changed, some calculation happening behind his eyes. He was the kind of person who understood status instinctively, who could read a room for threat the way a dog reads a room for food. He let go of my arm. We'll talk later, he said to me, like a promise. Then he walked out. I stood behind the desk for a moment with my hands flat on the surface again, and my heart going faster than I would have liked. The other guests by the elevator had noticed nothing, or were pretending they hadn't. The soft music was still playing. Are you all right? I looked up. The man from Suite 4001 was still there. He wasn't hovering. He'd taken a small step back, giving me the room to breathe that Scott had been taking away. Yes, I said. Thank you. He nodded. There was a pause. He's done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer, which was its own answer. You work here most evenings, 4 nights a week. He nodded again, reached into his jacket pocket and set a card on the desk. Plain, matte black, a phone number. No name, no title. If he comes back, he said, call that number before you call anyone else. Then he turned and walked back toward the elevator, unhurried, as though nothing had happened at all. I didn't call. I want to be honest about why, because I've thought about it a lot since. It wasn't stubbornness, exactly. It was more that I'd spent 2.5 years being managed by someone, having my options narrowed and my decisions questioned until I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. And the first thing you learn when you get out of that, the thing nobody tells you, the thing that takes months to understand, is that you have to start making decisions again. Even small ones, even imperfect ones. Calling a number on a card from a hotel guest whose name I wasn't supposed to say felt like handing over the reins again. And I wasn't ready to do that, so I didn't call. What I did do was talk to my supervisor, Adrian, who was 6 months from retirement and had seen every variety of human behavior the hospitality industry could produce. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then she said she was going to request that security keep a closer eye on the lobby during my shifts, and she was going to flag the situation with the GM, and I should document everything. I documented everything. It didn't help as much as you'd think. He came back on a Thursday, 10 days later. He didn't come inside this time. He stood on the sidewalk across the street in the rain for 45 minutes between 9 and 9:45. I know the exact times because I checked the clock twice, and then stopped checking because it was making it worse. I could see him from the lobby windows if I was standing at the right angle. He wasn't doing anything. He was just there. This is the part that's difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it. There's no law against standing on a sidewalk. There's no law against looking at a building. The thing he was doing was technically nothing. And technically nothing is very hard to report, very hard to prove, very hard to have taken seriously by anyone who hasn't felt what it does to your nervous system to be watched by someone who has already shown you exactly how much your no means to them. I went about my shift. I updated reservations and arranged a car service for a guest flying out at 6 a.m. and recommended a restaurant in Gastown to a couple celebrating an anniversary. I smiled at the right moments. At 9:47, when I looked again, he was gone. On my break, I sat in the staff room and looked at the card for a long time. Then, I put it back in my pocket and ate my sandwich. The third time, he came inside again. It was a Friday evening, busy in the way the hotel got on weekends. A wine event in the second-floor ballroom. 3 corporate groups checking in, the lobby running at full tilt. I was working the desk with my colleague, a guy named Terrence, who'd been at the Meridian for 11 years, and who had a gift for diffusing tension with a kind of polite, immovable calm. I didn't see Scott come in. I was dealing with a billing dispute, and I didn't see him until he was already at the desk. "Hey," he said, like we'd run into each other at the grocery store. I looked at Terrence. He'd already seen. He was already moving toward the phone. "You need to leave," I said, "right now. If you don't, I'm going to have you removed." "I wrote you a letter," he said. He reached into his coat pocket. "I don't want it. Just read. Sir." Terrence, solid as a wall, placed himself beside me. "I'm going to ask you to leave the property. If you don't, I'll be calling the police." Scott looked at him. That calculation again, that reading of the room. And then he looked past both of us, toward the elevator bank. I turned. The man from Suite 4001 was standing near the elevator, arms loose at his sides. He wasn't moving toward us. He wasn't doing anything visible. He was just standing there with his eyes on Scott, the same way Scott had been standing on the sidewalk in the rain, except that the effect was entirely different. There was a man on his left I hadn't noticed before, and another near the lobby door. Scott looked back at me. Something in his face had changed, the expectation gone, replaced by something more careful. "This isn't over," he said, but he left. I watched him go. Then I leaned forward slightly and put both hands on the desk and breathed. After a moment, I heard Terrence say, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "He's not going to come back tonight." "How do you know?" Terrence looked toward the elevator. "Just a feeling." I looked over. Suite 4001 had already gone. I found the card when I got home. I'd been carrying it in my coat pocket for 3 weeks, and the edges had gone soft. I sat on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor, I just couldn't make it to the couch, and turned it over in my hands. Then I called the number. It rang twice. "I was hoping you wouldn't need to use that," said the voice on the other end. "He's been back 3 times, I said. "He came inside twice." A pause. "Are you home now?" "Yes." "Is anyone with you?" "No." Another pause, shorter. "There'll be someone outside your building tonight. You won't see them. But they'll be there. I didn't ask for." "I know you didn't." His voice was even, not unkind. "You can ask me to stop anytime. I'll stop." I looked at the soft edges of the card in my hand. "Okay," I said. "Thank you. Get some sleep." I almost laughed. Yeah, his name was Vasil. I learned this by accident 3 days later, when the GM was on the phone in his office, and I happened to walk past at the wrong moment and caught the end of a sentence. Mr. Vakaru's request. Before the door swung shut. I didn't put it together right away. It was Adrian who filled in the rest, a few days after that, in the way Adrian sometimes did, matter-of-factly, without drama, while refilling her coffee. "You know the guest in the 4000s, she said. "I know who you mean. His family has significant business interests in Romania and here. Real estate, private equity." She sipped her coffee. "Among other things, according to the GM, among other things," I repeated. "He's been a guest here for years. Very particular, very private." She looked at me over her cup. "He asked HR to pull your file last week." I blinked. "He did what?" "Just the basics. Contact information. Employment history." She shrugged. The shrug of someone who has decided something is not her problem. "The GM approved it." I stood there for a moment. "Adrienne, what exactly does among other things mean?" She looked at me. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile and not quite a warning. "I imagine," she said carefully, "that it means he's very good at solving problems." He came to the desk 2 days later. Not to check out. He still had another week, at least. He came the way he always moved through the lobby, without announcing himself, without the faint performance of importance that most guests of his level couldn't help. He just appeared. "How are you sleeping?" he asked. It was so direct and so unexpected that for a moment I had no script. "Better," I said finally, "knowing someone's outside." He nodded. "He hasn't been back." I noticed. He was quiet for a moment. I had the sense that he was choosing his words the way you choose a route through traffic, with purpose, not at random. "I'd like to make sure it stays that way," he said. "But I don't want to make decisions about your life without telling you what I'm doing." I looked at him. "What are you doing?" Making sure he understands the scope of what he's decided to involve himself in. I thought about that. That's a very careful way to say something. I'm a careful person, and if I said I'd rather you didn't, he met my eyes, then I wouldn't. He paused. He would still stop, eventually. But the way I'm suggesting is faster. I looked down at the desk. The marble was cool under my hands. I thought about the sidewalk in the rain. I thought about 7 months of trying to start over, of documents in a file that didn't do much, of the way his hand on my arm had been technically nothing. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. He started to turn away. Then, and I don't know why, some reflex, something that had been sitting in me for weeks. I said, "Why?" He stopped. "You don't know me," I said. "You're a hotel guest. Why does any of this matter to you?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My sister was in a situation like yours a long time ago. It didn't end well because there was no one in the right place to stop it early." He said it without drama, just fact. "I'm sorry," I said. "So am I." A pause. "I'm very good at being in the right place." He checked out 2 weeks later. By then, Scott had, as far as I could tell, disappeared. No calls to the main line. Nothing outside. My nervous system started, slowly, to do the thing it does when a threat has been removed. It stands down. You don't notice it happening until you wake up one morning and realize you slept through the night without once lying awake, listening for something. On Vasile's last morning, I was at the desk for the early shift. He came down with a single bag, which he carried himself. He stopped at the desk to return his keycard, and I processed the checkout without incident. Then he said, "There's a coffee place on Granville. Matchstick. Do you know it?" "I do," I said. "I'll be there tomorrow at 9 if you want to have coffee." He slid the keycard across the desk. "If you don't want to, don't come. No obligation. No explanation needed." I looked at him. "That's it? That's how you ask?" "I'm a direct person. I thought you were careful." "Both," he said. And there was something in the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile but adjacent to one. I went. I want to be honest about that too. I went for complicated reasons. Curiosity, gratitude. The fact that I'd been on approximately 2 dates in 7 months and my best friend had started making pointed comments about it. But mostly I went because something in me had been paying attention since the night in the lobby, had been taking stock quietly, and the stock had returned something I didn't entirely know what to do with. Matchstick on Granville is small and warm and smells like espresso and wood smoke. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window with a black coffee and his phone face down on the table, which I noticed because so few people do that. We talked for 2 hours, not about Scott, not about whatever it was he did, the things that fell under among other things. We talked about Vancouver. He'd lived here for 6 years after Montreal, after London, after a decade in Bucharest that he described simply as complicated. I told him I'd grown up in Kelowna and moved to the city for school and never quite made it back. He asked what I'd studied. I said hospitality management with a minor in art history, which I'd never told anyone without bracing for a polite version of why, and he just said, "Which period?" with what appeared to be genuine interest. We talked about the mountains. We talked about food. He had an opinion about pho that I disagreed with, and I said so, which made him laugh. Actually laugh, a real one that changed his whole face. When we were getting ready to leave, he said, "I'd like to do this again." "You don't live here," I said. "I'm here 3 weeks out of every 6, he said. "And I could be more flexible than that." I looked at him, at the gray at his temples, and the way he'd kept his phone face down for 2 hours, and the fact that he'd asked what period instead of why. "I have Tuesdays and Sundays off," I said. "That was 8 months ago. There are things I can tell you and things I can't. Not because I don't trust you, but because some of it isn't entirely mine to tell, and some of it I'm still figuring out how to hold. What I can tell you is this. He is careful in the way he said. He is also, underneath that, warmer than he looks. He remembers everything I've told him. He never makes me feel like my caution is inconvenient. When I need space, he gives it without making me explain why I need it, or making me feel guilty for asking. He told me once, when I asked him directly what it was he did. All of it, not just the real estate, that he'd answer any question I actually asked. So I asked. He answered, and I sat with it for a week, turning it over, deciding what I thought about it. What I thought was, everyone has something they're sorting through. The question is whether they sort through it with you or at you. He sorts through it with me. Scott sent one more message, not to me directly, but to my old email address, the one I'd stopped using. My best friend found it when she was helping me archive some things, and she read it and said, "Do you want to read this?" And I said no, and she deleted it, and that was the end of that. I don't think about him much anymore. When I do, it's not with the weight it used to have. It's more like a chapter I've set down. The kind you understand better in retrospect once you've seen what comes after. What came after was better than I knew how to expect. That's the part that stays with me. Not the fear, not the lobby, not the nights I sat on my kitchen floor with a card in my hand. What stays with me is the Tuesday morning in Matchstick, with the mountains just visible through the rain, and a man asking me which period like the answer actually mattered. Being asked things like that, really asked by someone who actually waits for the answer, does something to you. It stitches back things that were quietly coming undone. I didn't know I needed that until it was happening. Now I do.